The media has a big role to play in this narrative building as well. I think the best action is done by good storytelling. I think there is a bit of fatigue among the general population with the talk about climate change, but I think we've pursued it the wrong way. There's been too much happening at a high level. Like if you see most of the common perceptions of sustainability in the average people is that it's all discussed at your COPs and your Davos and all these. And there seem to be a lot of commitments, but how that's really translating to on-ground action. We seem to have taken it for a fact that this is natural phenomena. I don't think we have quite been able to communicate the science behind why things are happening today as a result of anthropocentric sort of impacts of climate change. I think we've not really communicated that well. There is a growing distrust in science, which is a bigger worry. In India, it's very unique. I don't know if you've noticed, but regardless of which political party is in power, our climate commitments have never wavered. India has a net zero 2070 target. Who's reporting against it? Is there a website I can go to check out where are we against our net zero journey on 2070? So individual companies will tell you, okay, 50% more to go to net zero, 30% more to go to net zero. But from a global perspective, if somebody asks you today, the commitments made in the Paris Agreement, where are we against that today? Very difficult to answer that.
Welcome to Planet People Profit. I'm your host Sudipto Dey. Our guest today represents a 128-year-old Indian business conglomerate, Godrej Industries Group, that has a rich heritage of championing corporate social responsibility. Ramnath Vaidyanathan, who heads Godrej Group's Good and Green program, takes us through the evolution of the group's corporate sustainability journey. Ram, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sudipto.
Ram, can you take us through your own journey into the sustainability space? I'm curious, because
Sure.
We have interacted over the years.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, I'm sure there's a lot of interesting stories around it.
Well, actually, yes, because I completed my chemical engineering back in 2005.
Sure.
And I actually took a year off. And I think a lot of it, I was a little bit concerned about and a little disillusioned with the entire placement process in Indian engineering colleges. And despite having done 4 years of chemical engineering by choice, not out of compulsion, I realized that most of the opportunities that were being presented to students were in the IT sector.
Okay.
And I really wasn't interested in doing that. And so I decided to sort of recalibrate, take a year off, and pursue something on the creative side. So I used to play music then, so I took a year off just to pursue that. And I was the editor for a music magazine. And all of that gave me a little bit of time to figure out what I wanted to do next. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I think a lot of the external sort of directions were pointing me towards that people are saying to get into oil and gas or get into chemicals. But at that point, I was very interested in the idea of environmental sustainability. And I won't say that I foresaw how big it would become, but I felt that was something I really wanted to do more from a purpose perspective as well. So that's when I decided to pursue my master's in environmental science. I did a 1-year program. The first half was at Stanford in the US and the second half was at NTU in Singapore. And then that's where it really started. And then my first job was with the National Environment Agency of Singapore. So very interesting. The first job was more as a bureaucrat in this space, in the regulatory and the compliance space. A very interesting learning experience. But as with all things bureaucratic, after about, the first part was very interesting. You're setting up the entire framework for regulation. But once that in a very high trust, high compliance society, enforcement becomes very boring. So there was such a high rate of compliance, there was nothing for me to do. And that's when I decided to come back to India. I decided to pursue my MBA back in 2011. Okay. And post that, I've been in various aspects of sustainability. So straight after my MBA, I was in proper process engineering at a chemical manufacturer in Gujarat. I was doing EHS management at their plant. Then I got into the ESG consulting space with a company in Bangalore. With the same company, they then acquired a micro-wind turbine business. So I was leading the P&L for that particular subsidiary. So that was more business and selling side and more business development. And then 2019, I joined Godrej. I took the sum total of all my experiences till then. And I was on the buying side of technology. So it's been a very interesting journey. What I would say is that I never foresaw how big it would become as it has today. But with size also comes a lot of there's a lot of greenwashing in terms of ESG careers as well. So a lot of people seem to want to get into it without really having an understanding of it. But it's I still am learning on the job because it's such a new field. It's not like your established sciences. There's new climate science and new water science and new nature science coming up all the time. So it's a very interesting space for me to be in.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah. Your LinkedIn profile says that you are a home brewer.
Yeah.
Of course, you mentioned that you are a musician.
Yes. Yeah.
In not so past life.
No.
And also the fact that So how do you really get time to pursue those passions now?
I find myself having lesser and lesser time to pursue these because I think with the added focus on ESG in the world, my job scope is also expanding.
Okay.
So there's more, most companies have this approach called double hatting and triple hatting. I'm almost at 5 hats right now. So, it's getting to a space where there's very little time for my other pursuits. But hopefully I'll be able to get back to them and I always keep one foot in there. Mm-hmm. I have a 20-month-year-old as well now. So I'm hoping that'll also inspire me to, through him, be able to introduce him to some of my passions such as music or sports, the other things. So I'm hoping to get some more time. And the other interesting thing is with the expanding team, I'm finding that a lot more young kids who are getting into this space. Mm-hmm. I feel more confident at being able to pass on some of those things. So hopefully that'll free up my time for some more creative pursuits as I did before.
Absolutely. That's great. Coming to the business side of sustainability as a business, I'm pretty sure you've seen the changes over the last decade or so, and also the fact that in the last 18 to 20 months, life has not been easy for a sustainability professional, especially given the cross currents, the global cross currents. Yeah. Also the fact that a lot of experts are talking about the fact that there's a retreat of sustainability themes among businesses in the last 18 months or so. Yeah. What's your take on this whole?
So it's really interesting because I think there's a balanced argument to be had here, because I think there is a bit of fatigue among the general population with the talk about climate change, but I think we've pursued it the wrong way.
Okay.
There's been too much happening at a high level. Like if you see most of the common perceptions of sustainability in the average people is that it's all discussed at your COPs and your Davos and all these, and there seem to be a lot of commitments. Yeah. But how that's really translating to on-ground action, and how it's really translating to on-ground impact. Like we keep talking about flooding, for example.
Exactly.
But we seem to have taken it for a fact that this is natural phenomena. I don't think we've quite been able to communicate the science behind why things are happening today as a result of anthropocentric sort of impacts of climate change. I think we've not really communicated that well. I think in a larger sense, with the political shifts across the world, there is a growing distrust in science, which is a bigger worry. Mm-hmm. In terms of anti-vaccine or anti-climate change, there's a lot of skepticism around science. With greater availability of public information, there's also a challenge about who is credible and what is a credible source of information. And I think there are multiple ways in which you have to fix this. Firstly, I think we have to be much more transparent about action on the ground and not just, we don't want to see another Paris commitment. Now, we need to see genuine action on the ground. Mm-hmm. The others, I think, communication of science and communication of some of these principles in a more simplistic manner is very important. And I'd say media also has a very important role in this, because we keep speaking about this, but if you see the Indian media, for example, over the last year, could you tell me, for example, how many primetime slots were really devoted to discussing the issue of climate change? We speak about it in terms of tertiary impacts. We'll talk about, the water stress crisis in Bangalore, or we'll speak about, the air pollution crisis in Delhi. But how many of us are really linking that to the genuine problem of climate change? So the media has a big role to play in this narrative building as well. I think the best action is done by good storytelling.
Absolutely.
And that's where a huge gap is. And I think more fundamentally, I think in India at least, I would say I have a bit more positivity compared to say Europe or the US, where whether it's Trump's administration or if you see the CSRD and the EUDR, there's been a bit of sort of deflation of the entire mood around sustainability. But in India, it's very unique. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but regardless of which political party is in power, our climate commitments have never wavered.
Yes.
We always stay strong. Nobody's ever changed anything about our renewable energy commitments, our climate commitments. So we are lucky in that sense. There's stability in terms of planning, in terms of strategy. But in terms of communicating that to the common denominator, the lowest common denominator, there's a lot more to be done.
Okay.
So people, for example, are not relating higher prices of, say, crops or vegetables or atta that they buy to the impact that climate is having on reduced crop yields.
Exactly.
So building those narratives is very critical right now.
But I'm curious to understand, why do you say that we don't need another Paris Agreement? Because I thought that was sort of a big, a cornerstone for the whole debate which has been going on, the discussions that have been going on. So why do you think that's...
Because I think that served its purpose at that time.
Okay.
It's great to have commitments, but it's very hollow to keep talking about commitments every few years rather talking about the actions towards achieving those commitments. For example, India has a net zero 2070 target.
Absolutely.
who's reporting against it? Is there an online resource I can go, a website I can go to check out where are we against our net zero journey on 2070? We're talking about the 1.5 degree pledge and everybody's doing. So individual companies will tell you, okay, we have 50% more to go to net zero, 30% more to go to net zero. But from a global perspective, if somebody asks you today, the commitments made in the Paris Agreement, where are we against that today? It's very difficult to answer that. And one of the biggest reasons is that one thing that's conveniently ignored is that the financial commitments made as part of the Paris Agreement have not really been fulfilled. The flow of capital from the developed world to the developing world to fix climate change has not really happened. If you see the amount that was committed versus the money that's actually flowed, it's been very, very poor.
Absolutely.
So I think now every time a COP happens and they're like, there's a new commitment to, nobody wants new commitments. People want to see actions towards existing commitments. That's what I mean. I'm not saying Paris wasn't important. It was very critical. It was great we achieved that. But we can't just keep making new proclamations and commitments. It's time to actually show action on the ground.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because, we are heading towards another COP in a few months' time.
Yes.
And we'll be having new set of commitments, new set of,
exactly.
pledges.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you see, this COP is fraught with challenges as it is. They're destroying rainforests to do a COP is just, it's a parody almost. It's like something you would see on a Simpsons sketch where you're destroying entire rainforest to hold a climate event in Belém. And in fact, one of the things that we've been told is not to attend it because there are not enough hotels for all the CEOs to come. So, and they're now destroying rainforests to build hotels, which are never going to be used after it's done. So somewhere I think things like this is where erodes the common man's faith in work on climate change. They're like, it's just a big eyewash. This is just big guys talking about something. It really doesn't mean anything. People aren't really doing anything about it. Because even the other COPs, I remember the last two COPs are both held in very fossil fuel dependent economies.
Yes, exactly.
So the messaging is also very important. And it's all people, these world leaders flying in their private jets to these COPs and then preaching that, we must tax the common man on carbon. So I think there is a lot that has to be done practically rather than these grand proclamations. Have your COPs, but make it meaningful.
So you're saying optics matters?
Optics matters and actual content matters. The most, I would say, frustrating thing for me is, typically during COPs there's a lot of media frenzy. And the first thing they'll ask is, what are your expectations from this COP? I'm like, I have no idea. And I have no idea what to expect from a COP because I don't expect anything groundbreaking. That's the sad part. You have a meeting of some of the most important influential governments and industries in the world. And the true fact of the matter is none of us really expects anything concrete to come out of it. Then what's the purpose of it all? I think it can be more meaningful if we are more honest about what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to portray. So in principle, have your global events, have your global meetings. It's important. It's important for us because this is a collaborative effort.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest about what metrics we're tracking. Let's be transparent about what work is happening. And that's the only way in which you're going to enable more trust in the entire process. And you're going to get more people on board, their buy-in to really do this.
So there's no need to throw the baby with the bathwater?
No, of course not. Tweak it. The entire idea of people getting together to solve climate change is not wrong. But it has to translate into meaningful action, not just big words and commitments.
Interesting. Coming back to the Godrej Group, Industries Group, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. Good and green is the philosophy that guides the group's sustainability programs and all your practices and everything. Could you take us through the how it has evolved over the years, and could you take us through the thinking?
Sure. So as a formal philosophy, good and green was adopted by the Godrej Group in 2011. That was creation of the first good and green strategy and the team. But from a philosophical perspective, it is just a culmination of what the family's all been all about. So the entire history, the nation builders, huge philanthropists. And the interesting aspect is, a lot of people don't know, is that S.P. Godrej, who's Nadir and Adi Godrej's uncle, was one of the pioneers of the nature conservation movement in India. He's the one who brought WWF to India. And he was very involved in tiger conservation, a lot of the other projects. So they've always had one foot in the green bit as well, apart from their philanthropy, which is towards community building. 2011 was when it was formalized, and that was the first phase of sustainability, which was 2011 to 20. The second phase of 21 to 26, we're coming to an end of this, and we're now getting into our strategy for our phase 3. I won't get too much into the specifics, but largely I would say the big shift has been moving from a macro level sort of target, more principled approach about how do we reduce emissions, increase renewable energy, reduce waste, more on operational, how do we improve our operational performance and sustainability, In the second phase, it was about how do we look beyond our operations, look at the entire supply chain, look at sustainable procurement, look at sustainable supply chains, look at policies, look at governance. That was in the second phase. And where in the third phase, the real evolution is happening is it's no longer a top-down strategy.
Okay.
We're not going to have a good and green strategy at a group level and then say, what can each business do? Because I think the maturity level of ESG among the group companies is so high, that's very bespoke problems for bespoke companies. What I mean by that is, now we take Godrej Properties, for example.
Sure.
They don't have an issue with emissions because their scope 1 and 2 emissions are very low. They have no issue. They're a multiple times water positive company. So that bit is taken care of. So what's the point of setting emissions targets for them? Rather, let's focus on the one key area there are two key areas for properties. One is construction and demolition waste. How do we bring greater circularity to it? Because that's a big issue in India. Because there's a lot of infrastructure happening and current state of how that recovery of materials is happening from C&D waste is very poor. The other is green materials itself. Because fundamentally, if you're making a building, the biggest issue is the embodied carbon. All the carbon emissions going towards making your cement, steel, tiles, glass. And how do I reduce that? Now, that can be done by three ways. You either look at innovative design, where I use lesser amount of material, or I use materials which consumes lesser amount of energy. Second is looking at alternative materials. Can I look at things away from cement and steel? Third would be on the existing material, how do I green them? How do I make greener cement, greener steel, greener glass, things like that. So now, if you ask me what the strategy for GPL is going to be in the next 5 years, that's it. We're going to focus on these very specific focus areas and focus on them. The good and green goal will essentially it'll be a bottom-up one. It'll be a culmination or sort of a combination of these multiple group companies, their own roadmaps, into more of a philosophical sort of vision for good and green, what we really want to do in the next phase. And I think one common thing across all the businesses is that we're going to be involved more in landscape level action.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, it's no longer enough for us to look at just our operations or even just our own supply chain. It's about now trying to influence the entire landscape. And what I mean by this is, if you take agro commodities, for example.
Okay.
It's not enough for Godrej to say, look, I'm going to identify farmers who supply to me and work with them. Because that's not how the ecosystem really works. In India, the smallholder farmer is too small, and it's really at the aggregator level where any kind of action can be made.
Absolutely.
So what's the point in spending countless hours and resources and money in trying to pinpoint it down to that single last denominator? The more common sense approach, and the approach that is really going to move the needle, is solving for a sector as a whole in a geography. So rather than say, I'm going to look for Godrej's farmers who supply milk to solve for dairy, I'm going to look at the approach saying that how do I solve for dairy and regenerative agriculture towards better, lower emission dairy in the state of Telangana, for example. So looking at the landscape overall, rather than just looking at our own supply chains. That also means we're now getting into the space of a lot more policy advocacy because like I said, we've come through 2 phases. So we feel we're in a space to also share our best practice and things that we've learned with the larger ecosystem, be it our own suppliers, be it with the government, be it with our peers. There are no competitors in ESG. So, I always call them my peers because an ITC at a Mahindra or even a Unilever who's in the traditional sense of the word, they're competitors in the marketplace. But when you're trying to solve for things like, say, sustainable palm oil, which is a problem both them and us face,
absolutely,
it's a joint approach. So I have the luxury of calling them collaborators and peers rather than competitors, which is a good way to be. So largely, that's the big shift. It's very bespoke strategies. It's more landscape level things. And I think these are all very challenging because we're now talking about things that are completely out of our operational control. It's easy to make capex decisions or decisions when it's your own operations, your own manufacturing. When it starts going outside your scope, there's little you can influence. It's veering into very uncharted waters. So it's a big challenge for us, but that's what we believe is needed to really shift the needle at a national level.
But tell me one thing, in terms of, say, you have seen the global cross currents against, or, there were crosswinds and against sustainability. In that scenario, how do you sort of, when you're going down down to the line managers and to the shop floor level, how do you sort of, make them believe, convince them that, what you are doing is good and green? Is there a challenge you see there?
I don't think there's a challenge from a principal perspective, nobody's against being good. If you go to a line manager and say, look, I think it's good if you use lesser energy, or I think it's good if you use lesser water, nobody's principally going to say that's a bad thing. The real question is not at the line manager level. It's actually at the shareholder investor level. That's where influence really has to happen. And the way I'm looking at it is that in these crosswinds actually is a massive opportunity for India and Indian industry to become a net supplier of low emission goods and commodities for the world.
Interesting.
Because we have a very high RE target and we have made good progress, and we have the luxury of obtaining green power at a much cheaper rate than anywhere in the world. Today, if you ask any company, will you go for solar? The issue is not about convincing them to go for any renewable because it's cheaper than the grid.
Exactly.
It's an availability issue. It's not a willingness issue. Or in many cases, a regulatory issue, because if you're an MSME or a very small enterprise, you don't have enough power requirements to really qualify for buying RE, which needs to be fixed. But in principle, with this, avoiding the entire brown growth path that the Western world took, we have a chance to really become a supplier of low environmental impact commodities. Now, it's happening at a, I would say, ad hoc micro basis, including us at Godrej. We've been able to sell certain goods to European markets, certain products, with the tag of environmental impact. Like basically command a premium because of lower emissions per ton of that product. And this is actually already happening. So European companies, American companies who have mandates to reduce their supply chain emissions are turning towards us to say, okay, show us your lower emission product, we'll happily pay a premium to buy that from you.
Any anecdotes you'd like to share?
We have, for example, in the agro space, both from a dairy perspective, we have a cattle genetics business as well. We've been actually able to cultivate embryos which have a much lower environmental footprint compared to traditional cattle. And even in the palm oil space. In India, it's very unique because palm oil globally is a bad word in terms of deforestation, but in India it's very unique because Indian palm oil plantations do not deforest. They've been, because in India we can't deforest and own land as corporates. It's being done on contract farming basis with farmers who are probably growing paddy or something else on those lands, degraded lands on which we are now growing palm. So it's fundamentally a sustainable product. We've been able to create at Godrej the entire digital supply chain for this to really show the numbers behind that. And that has actually helped us sell some of our palm oil derivative products to Western customers at a premium, because we've been able to back it up with numbers. So these are just a couple of the anecdotes, but that's growing. You're getting a lot more companies asking for environmental performance behind the products we sell, and we get a preferential sort of supply treatment if we show that. And this is a big signal to the Indian government as well, that if we spend some money right now in creating the database for Indian commodities, huge opportunity.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm also like something that I want to, that's crossed my mind. When you are going about your strategy in terms of good and green, Godrej as a group went through a bifurcation last year. So how did that play out?
No real impact, because the good and green philosophy was shared by the entire group, whether it was Industries Group or enterprises. In fact, both teams were called good and green, which led to a lot of confusion because many people would contact me about Boyce's good and green team, many people contact them about our good and green team, because they were both called good and green. The philosophy and the larger principles are the same. So it's not, but in terms of operational targets, in terms of what it really meant for governance, it's always been separate. The real bifurcation happened more at the board level, and it didn't really impact our good and green operational targets or our philosophy or any of our principles. So there was no real impact. So what I would say is that being in the Industries Group, one huge, it wasn't linked to this necessarily, but we've been able to create board level ESG committees for each of the group companies, which has independent directors as well. So there's an additional oversight from external directors, which of course gives us more credibility in terms of our ESG communication, but also gives us a very interesting directional sort of focus. Because sometimes it's good to have an outside perspective at the board level oversight to really tell you that this is what you should be doing, or have you thought about a particular aspect. So that's been a big shift over the last few years on this.
So could you take us through some of these, for example, how do you sort of course, it has to be board driven. It has driven from the top. ESG is something has driven from the top, and now, as you say that you mentioned that it has to come down to the shop floor level. So how has these structures been created within the organization, and how do you sort of buy in employees into this whole good and green strategy, good and green philosophy? What has been your experience in that?
So there's a push and pull approach both. And the one big thing was a lot of people mentioned about trickling down. We have a different philosophy. It's also sideways. And what I mean by that is we have, like I already mentioned, we have boards. Independent ESG boards at each of these companies.
Just like you have CSR boards.
CSR is mandated by law. This is not, there's no mandate for it. We've done it voluntarily. But CSR, you have to have a
committee.
CSR committee by law. But this is more of by design we've created it. That's the first level of governance. What we also instituted is for all the senior leadership, we have a mandatory people and planet goal. So every single member of the leadership regardless of whether your operations, your HR, your procurement, your legal, you have to have one goal in your goal sheet, which is either a people goal or a planet goal. And what that's been really interesting is that that's also directly linked to the remuneration.
Okay.
Because your variable payout is based on your achievement of these KPIs. So we've actually put our money where our mouth is. We've said, okay, your goals have to be linked to sustainability overall, our goals, and your individual rewards also linked to that. That's a great way of getting buy-in.
And these are what, senior management people or?
All senior management. Okay. And then of course they have the flexibility to trickle those goals down to their own teams the way they want to. That's freedom they do have. So what has happened, that's the push part of it, where we've created this governance framework, and we've made it mandatory for them to take it up. So that itself is a big incentive or a driver to achieve some of these goals. But there's not enough to just do that. We also invest heavily in capacity building.
Okay.
In terms of training people on ESG. When I'm saying training, a lot of people just focus on the operational bit. Because traditionally, like even you said right now, shop floor, because our mentality is the production guys should know about sustainability. But we invest heavily, even people like our audit teams and our risk teams, to understand, our CFOs, for example. We are part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Mr. Nader Godrej is on the exco of that. And under their programs, one of their programs called the CFO Network. Because growingly, I think one of the big shifts is that decision making and how ESG is playing a role in that, in financial decision making. So our CFOs really equipped with the know-how to really incorporate that.
Okay.
Climate risk and climate finance and opportunities. Are they factoring in these things in their financial decision making? So we've involved our CFOs in this as well. So that's what I meant by horizontal as well. It's no longer just top down, it's across. So procurement teams have a sustainability target. Our audit team has a sustainability target. Our legal team has a sustainability target. So it's spreading both vertically as well as horizontally across the organization. That is what the hope is. And it's like, I always bring the example of IT. IT when it first started off, maybe in companies in the late 80s, 90s, it was a function, just like how sustainability was. But today, it's spread horizontally. A finance person has to have very smart knowledge of SAP and how to use that as well, right? It's not enough for him to say, I'm not a tech guy, so I don't understand IT. The same way sustainability knowledge is now spreading across the function. So you'll have a lot of specialist roles now. You'll have specialists in sustainable procurement, R&D. How do you bring in ESG principles in new product development? Can you have specific focus on, say, one guy saying, I'm going to work just on sustainable packaging, for example. So this is how it's really spread across the organization. And it's taken a good 5 years to set this entire framework up. And now, of course, we're in the monitoring phase of really achieving those targets. But like I said, it's a push and pull approach. It's not just mandating from the top down and driving it with a stick, but incentives, capacity building, showing the opportunities. Telling somebody in risk that, look, if you add ESG to your portfolio as a personal growth also, it's a really good thing for you to have in your armory, is a very good pitch. So that's how we've been able to really do this.
But doesn't it scare you? If after some point of time, if everybody is a flag bearer of sustainability, what is the role of a chief sustainability officer?
I've often said, and I think I wrote an article about this a few weeks ago, that I would be very happy if my role became redundant in a few years, because it gives me the opportunity to skill myself as well, or what are the additional skills I need to add to really add value to an organization. But of course, that may be taking it to an extreme in terms of redundancy, but what I would really say is that it's a good problem to have. I'm not scared about it, because as with any other function, expertise and domain knowledge is always going to be important. But it's really important for the good of the entire organization for everybody to own a bit of this. There will always be subject matter expertise that's required. But in terms of breadth of knowledge of this across the organization, it's a very important thing, and I'm all for it. It doesn't scare me at all.
Good to hear that.
Yeah.
You took us through the three phases, of good and green.
Yeah.
Have there been any lessons from these three phases that you'd like to share? Like, phase 1, phase 2, of course, phase 3 is, of course, going to happen. But are there any lessons that you've picked up from phase 1, put that into practice in phase 2, and going forward, phase 3, you're going to see some of the practices in phase 3?
So I think a lot of lessons. We continue to learn on the job all the time. I think the first big lesson in the first phase we learned was that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. A lot of people in 2011 were already worrying about 2020. So, how will we achieve those? What we learned is make a move. Start moving on things. Don't worry about the last 20%. The first 80% is easily achievable in any sustainability journey. So people will be like, how will I ever get to 100% RE? I'm like, fine. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get to 50% to start off with. But that 50% makes a big impact. So it's more important to start moving on things rather than worry about whether you'll get there at the end. Nobody knows if we'll get there at the end. To be honest, climate science is also constantly moving the goalposts because we're constantly playing catch up, right? But that's a very important thing. And I think that's a principle I tell everybody because it seems very daunting for companies who are just starting on their sustainability journey. Okay, oh my God, look at you guys are on this, you're doing this. How will we ever get there? We're like, all of us started at some place, right? So that's really critical. The second is the sheer importance of data. Data is critical.
Okay.
And we're investing heavily now in analytics and data, really strengthening the accuracy of our data reporting systems because that is critical in decision making.
Okay.
You can only make good decisions if you're backed up with good data. And this is true of any sphere, in ESG as well. Unless you know accurately, say for example, if you have a factory, like some of our factories which make, say, 10 products, it's great to have macro level data, but if you really want to start solving for problems, you have got to look at product level monitoring.
Absolutely.
So that's when you start figuring out, okay, this is my more energy intensive product. Now I'll actually give you a case where we moved one of our more energy intensive products to a factory which has a higher renewable energy consumption.
Okay.
So by doing that, we took a big emitting sort of product from one factory to a place where it became zero emissions, despite being a big energy consumer. That's how it helps in decision making. So data and decision making are absolutely critical. We live in an age where we're data rich, but we have volumes of data. I don't know if we are using it smartly enough. And with AI and other technologies, and we have a massive opportunity to really get very useful insights for decision making on this. The third thing would be people, and you need to invest in good people. You need buy-in of people. You need to know how to influence people. Having the right team, having the right ownership at the top is very critical. When I say people, I'm talking everything from leadership to skilled personnel to constant upskilling of existing personnel as well. And the fourth and most important, which is very often overlooked, is values. It's very important to understand why sustainability is important to you from a values and a purpose perspective. Unless you define that, everything is going to have a short-term life. Now I know at Godrej now, because the value part is so strong, it doesn't matter who's in the chair.
So the family sort of...
that value has been so
comes
set
from
in the
family,
DNA that it doesn't matter who's the CEO, who's the CSO. Nobody's going to go do anything that's against that.
Exactly.
Against that value system. So that is very critical. And
so it becomes a culture.
Culture, values, and purpose are very important, and not enough is spoken about the importance of that in driving sustainability. So these are some of the big lessons, I would say.
But the family does play a big role, right?
Huge
the fact
role.
that there's signaling, messaging coming from the...
And they're very actively involved. It's not just signaling. All the board members, all the board committees I spoke about have one of the family members or two of the family members in those. So they're part of the boards. And they're not just, they're very knowledgeable about the subject as well. They spend time in inculcating knowledge about this as well. So any discussion you have with them cannot be very peripheral. They get into the depth of things. So I think in a way it's very lucky because not many CSOs or sustainability leads have that kind of access or the ear of the promoter. But we are lucky in Godrej to have that. And I think we've been able to use that to our advantage to really accelerate our ESG journey.
Interesting. Of course, CSR kicked in sometime in 2009 and, that becomes a compliance issue. You see overlaps between the CSR and the sustainability journey towards the net zero goals that the businesses have?
Yes, absolutely. We've already done it. See, CSR, let's understand one thing. Climate risk and climate vulnerability and water and climate change have social impact as well. We're not just a macro environmental thing. It affects people on the ground, whether it's heat stress in the urban or lowering yields for farmers. These are all things that actively impact them. So we have actually used a lot of our CSR funding to solve for community level climate issues.
Okay.
We've done 4 large watershed programs in some of the most drought hit areas of India. In Telangana and Madhya Pradesh, in Maharashtra, Beed, the sugar belt is known for its drought issues. And today we're at about 14 times water positivity because of that. I mean, for every 1 liter water we consume through watersheds, we add 14 liters back to the environment. And this has largely been done more from a community perspective. It wasn't that our factories are in these locations. We don't stand to benefit anything from this, but this is more towards enriching the overall ecosystem in India. So I think there's a massive overlap between CSR and ESG, but one must be very careful not to dilute the principles of CSR. And greenwashing can be a very big risk in this space. Because CSR as such, as you know, it's very tightly bound by regulations.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of important principles of CSR as well. While on paper, it may not be against the CSR regulation, but in spirit also it's important. It should benefit the community and the planet at large. Now, for example, we've done a lot of CSR projects on plastics, and we did it at a community level to really look at communities with MLBs and say, okay, how do we solve for the problem of segregation, collection, all those things? And now we realize that the challenge isn't the value chain. I mean, that there are challenges there, but the real challenge is the actual science behind it. Like, we don't have good quality recycling technology. We don't have, we don't have enough alternative materials. We don't have enough recycled or recyclable plastics in the. So we're pivoting out of our CSR work towards incubators and accelerators who are going to create solutions for the entire ecosystem, not just for Godrej. So that's another great example of how you use CSR to create some common good. So there's a massive overlap between CSR and ESG, and I think because ESG itself is now covering such a big spectrum of things, everything from human rights to emissions to climate vulnerability, so you'll see a lot more overlap between these two.
But from a compliance perspective, does it become very challenging because, the boundaries, when you're crossing those boundaries?
If you have, that's the thing. It's all about creating good processes and good checks in place to make sure that your decision making on this is ticking all the boxes.
Okay.
But if you create good governance structure around it, there's no real challenge to it.
There's a growing concern about, the extreme weather and the climate. Are you going to see more action on that front? Especially, the supply chains of corporate India are vulnerable. We've seen that in recent past. Are you going to see more action on that front from the group and on an overall basis?
I think, because I think one of the things I mentioned is the landscape approach, which is again now solving for, but it's a very big canvas and there are a lot more questions than answers at this stage, because even if you take, say, infrastructure like Godrej Properties, I can build the more climate resilient building on the planet if I want. I can build a platinum rated factory for a chemicals business, which is all the climate resilience aspects. Heat stress skill. I've put coatings to reduce heat, which means my air conditioning costs go down. I put in water recycling, so zero liquid discharge, zero waste to landfill. But what happens if the approach road to the factory, which is owned by the municipal council, gets flooded or gets destroyed by a weather event? So I think that's the big challenge. Climate resilience can't be isolated to individual, infrastructure. We have to look at climate resilience from an interoperability perspective.
It's a collaborative approach.
Not just collaborative within industry, but collaborative with communities, with government as well. So just to start off with, I know there is a lot of planning happening in Bombay at least for the climate risk resilience planning for creating a climate resilience plan for Mumbai. Very early days yet, but we are actively contributing to that as well in terms of our know-how, in terms of our resources. But that's a big area of concern, climate resilience, because that's not nearly talked about enough. Even like I mentioned, right, agri yields, we report on weather patterns impacting agricultural yields, but we haven't yet linked it to how do I, say, build crop insurance, which really takes into account climate risk. Today, crop insurance is there as a product. But is it, so if I invest in my agri value chain to build climate resilience, could that then lead to a lower crop insurance premium for the farmer? So these kind of interlinkages between the financial sector and the agri sector, these still have to be built. So we're still in a very early stage, I would say. We have a climate resilience plan now, we have done a TCFD assessment, all of that is really built into our operating plans. But like I said, it's not enough for us to just look inwards. It's about building those connections to create these sort of plans for the larger macro environment.
It's been like from 2011 to 2025 and going forward, it's been a journey which I'm pretty sure there are a lot of learnings here. But from the economics point of view of sustainability, do you see enough consumer buy-in into sustainability?
I think it varies by sector to sector. Now, if you take I always go back to properties as a great example for a successful green product sort of ecosystem. It's one of the few sectors where a green product is very clearly defined. A platinum rated building, you know what the parameters are to be a platinum rated building. You know what the parameters are for a gold rated building. So there's no discretion or no discrepancy on understanding what a green product really is. And it has a defined segment for buyers. There is a segment of commercial customers, residential customers who will want to buy a platinum rated home. But the same thing is not there in, say, a low value product market, say in consumer products or in agri. Now a bar of soap, somebody who's buying a bar of soap is not really looking to pay a premium to have a more sustainable bar of soap. So that's where the real challenge is. There is a certain sector or segment of consumers who are willing to pay a premium, who are looking for greener products. But it's still largely the B2B space where other businesses are buying from us. That's where we see real demand for greener products. At the individual consumer level, not yet. But I don't believe we've asking that in the right questions. Because there are two, and this is, I get into debates about this with people all the time, because we always talk about a green premium.
Exactly, I was coming to that, yes.
But why not a green discount? Because you can't say sustainability has saved me money, which it has, because if you consume lesser energy, if you move to RE, which is cheaper, if you consume lesser water, you've saved money. So when you've saved money by going green, why don't you pass on that money as a green discount to your consumers?
Yes.
We always talk about, oh, I've done this extra, so I'm going to charge a green premium. But why not a green discount? Then the economics of this really have to go. We're not asking the consumers the right questions. So even if you see the surveys, right, they'll be very broad-based. If you ask them, would you buy a sustainable, it's always a caveat saying, would you buy a sustainable product if it meant it was more expensive? But why are we adding that caveat? If I told a consumer, these two products are the same price, would you pick the most sustainable one? They'll say yes.
Exactly.
So I think it's asking the right questions, communicating ESG better through our products. That's another big area of focus for us. How do we communicate sustainability information about products better to consumers to enable them to make a more informed decisions? Also what we're seeing. And you have a young child as well. I'm sure you'll also understand that
absolutely
that generation is getting more and more sort of invested in buying products that not just are so sustainable, but also ethically.
Absolutely.
They want to buy from companies which have that strong ESG principles and backbone. So the companies which are identifying this trend early and communicating this about their products effectively are already ahead in this race. It's getting better, but in a price-sensitive market like India, where cost and price is still a major decision-making tool, for customers to buy anything, it'll take some time. It's not going to happen instantly, but the shoots of this are already there.
But from the group perspective,
yeah.
Do you see a time where you'll have a portfolio of products which are good and green?
We already do.
And you sort of, and that portfolio...
We already do. In fact, we are coming up, by the end of this year, we'll coming out to the product scorecard, which shows for every product from 2020 to now, how have we improved the environmental performance of that particular product. We're going to come up with the green product scorecard for this. And we're going to, this is what I spoke about, we're going to communicate this information to our consumers as well, to help them understand that, the product they're buying today probably has a 50% lesser energy usage compared to say 2020. And so we're already creating this portfolio of good and green. And I am very careful not to use the word green product, because unlike say a properties where there's a clear definition of what a green product is, we only talk about making products greener. There is no absolute green, unless it's defined. Unless say the FMCG industry got together and said, okay, for a bar of soap, this is the cutoff for emissions. If you do kilograms of CO2 per bar of soap, if you're above this, you're not a green product. If you're below this, you're a green product. Unless we get to that level of baselining, all I can say is that I have reduced my emissions for this product by 20% in the last 3 years. So I've made it greener. But by what definition I call something an absolute green product is impossible, unless we define industry level standards for this.
But you see us moving towards this concept of green discount. Do you see us moving towards that at some point of time?
I hope so. I mean, I don't know why it's already not happening, but I would hope so. It's something we're trying to also, incentivize within our group. But the first step is really to have that product level scorecard information as to what should that discount be based on the environmental performance of that particular product. So it will take time to buy in. The idea of a green discount is still because you mentioned 15 years sustainability. Even today, I still get asked the question, is sustainability good for business? I'm like, it's obviously good for business. It's every single major index in the world has told you that being strong on sustainability improves your financial performance. Investors today, first thing they'll ask you is, what are your ESG goals? How are you doing in emissions? And I am an investor calls at least once a month, because 50% of the time is spent on asking about ESG. So clearly investors are looking to put their money towards ESG forward companies, not just because it's the right thing to do, because they view it as a lower risk. We have a very climate uncertain future. And companies which are better prepared for this are viewed by investors as a lower risk. So for me, that part of the box has been fixed. How do we translate this to green discounts for products is the next part of it, which hopefully we'll do soon.
Do you see that happening in the next 10 years when this, as you roll out this good and green program?
Yes. At least from our perspective, we'll be able to at least institute something in the next 5 years, I would hope so. But from a larger ecosystem perspective, 10 years, maybe some of the bigger companies you'll see. And you'll see more ESG. Even now, if you see, there's a subtle shift in advertising. There's a lot more focus on sustainable products in advertising. It's a subtle shift, but you're seeing it. You're seeing a use of a lot more, if you see Coke did an entire campaign around a zero. They removed the label from the Sprite bottle.
Yes.
And they just embossed the bottle and they said, this is a new thing for reduction of this plastic. So you're already seeing it happening among the big brands. As that customer segment grows, you will see more of this happening. So younger generation, my hopes are all on them that they will make demands, because once they start voting with their wallet, right, that's when you'll see the major shift happening.
Your journey, I remember you mentioned it once, a decarbonization journey. Of course, I think the low-hanging fruit is the solarization.
Yes.
And of course, the less said thing is the energy efficiency improvements.
Yes.
Would you like to sort of, take us through your journey, your experience in that?
So it's very interesting. We did a study of in 2022. We did a study of our decarbonization up till then. It was actually 60% of our emission reduction actually came from energy efficiency, not from adopting green power. So a lot of people don't pay enough attention to this. They focus more on transitioning from fossil fuel to green, which is good, but just improving energy efficiency is a huge, it's a huge mover of the needle. We are actually signatories to this EP 100 commitment of the climate group, which is a commitment to double our energy productivity by the year 2030. We took the target in 2018. And that's been a big driver for us to really improve. And energy efficiency is actually an easier sell compared to, say, RE also. Because most energy efficiency projects don't require heavy capex investments. Some replacement projects will be there, but the incentive that if you consume less energy, you're going to save your operating costs is a very easy buy-in from manufacturing teams. The real struggle is when you start looking at some things which may not have a quick payback period but have a big climate impact, which is why we introduced the idea of carbon price and using an internal carbon price in the decision making. So, and it's not just for the sake of using a carbon price. We are spending that money elsewhere in reducing our emissions impact, whether it's through RE, whether it's through offsets, through planting trees or whatever it is. What if I could translate that cost in the decision making for a technology itself, which means that I won't have to spend that money later to mitigate. So building in that carbon pricing has actually helped us bring down the sort of payback period for some of the, on the edge projects, which are like, we're not quite sure. This is a 3-year, 4-year payback. We're not quite sure whether we should invest in this. We've been able to bring this down to 2 years, which then makes it, more feasible for the companies to really take up these projects. So I would say energy efficiency has been a big mover of the needle for us that way.
Interesting. Coming back to the role of Chief Sustainability Officer, we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of, how do you see the role changing going forward? And are there any sort of myths that you feel needs to be busted about this role, which maybe your insights will help some of the youngsters coming into the space?
Sure. First in terms of evolution of the role, I think the CSOs will start playing a larger role at the decision-making table.
Okay.
Most companies have a smaller group at the top management made up of the key leaders in the organization who lead the strategic decision-making. You will find CSOs playing a larger role in these because the ESG impacts on business are getting more and more prevalent. So that has to be factored in the larger macro sort of level. In terms of myths about, I think one, again, future evolution, I've told you, CSOs will have to upskill themselves. They'll have to learn data science. They'll have to understand other aspects of the business to really, and talk about green products, for example. How does a CSO then become almost a business development lead for the organization? Because how do you identify green products or sectors to get into, which could be, not just reducing your environmental footprint, but a source of revenue and opportunity for the company as well. One myth I'd like to bust is that it still is a very specialist role. It's not a lot of people think people can double hat saying, the chief communications officer can also do ESG because it's largely a communication. No, it's not. It still requires a lot of expertise. You need specialized people, and now you're getting into domain specialization.
Okay.
For a financial services CSO, has to be very knowledgeable about what it means for that sector. It's not enough for generalists to come in and sort of do the job for everyone. So a lot more depth of skill, a lot more depth of knowledge is required for this. And what I would give, the advice I would give for young people trying to get into this role is, again, build your depth of knowledge, and from a soft skill perspective, influencing. Because ultimately it's getting the buy-in of the people with the money, the promoters and the shareholders, to really influence some of them to put their money towards ESG forward sort of strategy. So learning how to influence people and of course having good depth of knowledge, these are two non-negotiables for people getting into this role.
Finally, how far is the CSO from the CEO role?
I think a CSO could eventually in the next 5 years, you'll see maybe certain CSOs grow into CEO role. Because like I said, a CSO has to have a much more in-depth understanding of the business now. It's not
Exactly.
a specialist sitting outside the functions anymore. So, even me, I have a very good idea of how the business is run now, from our products to our finance to our legal to our audit processes. So you can see, I could definitely foresee like how certain CFOs grow into CEO roles, how certain manufacturing officers grow into CEO roles. I can see a CSO growing into a CEO role as well in the future. Because a lot of CEOs actually now are very actively involved in sustainability. So a lot of sustainability activity is now driven by CEOs of companies. So the same can happen the other way around as well. A lot of CSOs can pick up sort of strategic direction, especially if the company is invested towards ESG lens product view or ESG lens strategy view. You will see this growing into that. It's an interesting question, and I can definitely see it happening.
I think it's a lovely note to, a positive note to end the show.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to maybe you wearing that hat someday.
I think say in Delhi, na aapke muh mein ghee shakkar, but hopefully, let's see.
Thank you, Ram. Thanks for your time
Thank you.
and thanks for the insights.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.